Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I show you how to take cuttings from your basil plant to make more basil plants. So let's go. Who doesn't love fresh basil? Not only do I love the taste of it, I just love the way it smells. And a lot of times people just buy a basil plant, and as soon as the plant starts to go to blossom or create flowers, they just think the plant is done and that's it for the season. But my experience has been when that happens, it's a shame because as my tomatoes are just starting to ripen in the late summer, early fall, I don't have any basil. And so what I try to do now is get basil growing during the winter months, enjoy it during the winter, as you can see here. And then in the early spring, I like to take cuttings from my plants and create more plants so that I have plants ready to go for my garden for midsummer and then take more cuttings so I have plants ready to go for late summer. It's a great way to increase your stock in basil without having to buy any more basil plants. Now, I've never tried making my own pesto. Maybe I'll try this year. But what I love to do is take the basil and pair it with some fresh cherry tomatoes from my garden, some mozzarella, and just a little bit of balsamic vinegar or balsamic glaze. So good. The plants that you see here were started on January 14th. That was about 3 months from today. Basil is very easy to start from seed, but it does grow slowly if you are going to grow it from seed. So you want to take that into account. And if you want basil quickly, the quickest way to get more basil plants is to take cuttings from it. I still have about 5 weeks until my average last frost date, which is May 15th. So it's a great time for me to be starting some new plants, get some cuttings going. And these plants probably will not end up in the garden, but at least the new plants that I create from cuttings can then get placed in my garden this year. In order to get cuttings, the first thing you need a basil plant. And you can see we have many to play with today, but you really only just need one. And these are just a normal green looking, I forget the variety, and if I can find the variety, I'll put it up on the screen. There are some purple basils out there, different varieties of basils. The same process will work with those basils as well. Just make sure that the basil that you choose is free of any disease, any pests, and the most important thing is make sure that the stem that you're going to be taking a cutting from does not have a blossom on it. You want to make sure you're getting a stem that is ready to put its energy into the roots, not into producing flowers or going to seed. The next thing you're going to need is some sort of a clear vase, clear cup, or clear jar. And you want it to be at least 3 or 4 inches in height so that it's tall enough to hold the cutting or cuttings that you're going to be taking. The next thing you'll need some water. Now, if you have tap water that's heavily chlorinated, it might be a good idea to just put the water in the jar and let it sit for about 1 day, just to let the chlorine evaporate. Now, where I live, we don't have chlorine in our water. I have a well, but that's what I researched and that's what I read. Although I'd love to hear from you. If you've been able to start cuttings of tomatoes or basil or any other plants using chlorinated water, did it work for you? So I'd love to know that in the comments, and anyone else that has chlorinated water might want to know as well. So thank you if you can share that information. You'll also need something that's sharp to take your cuttings with. And what I have is I have micro snips. They're small little hand pruners, so I can get right in there and make my cuttings nice and easily. The next two things are optional, but they are good practice. And the first thing is a cotton ball. Second thing is rubbing alcohol. And you would use this just to sterilize your cutting instrument. Now, if you're only taking cuttings from one plant, then you don't need to do this step. But if you plan on taking cuttings from a bunch of different plants, then it's always a good idea to sterilize your cutting instrument in between cuttings of each individual plant. What I also found during my research was you can take cuttings, put a little bit of rooting hormone on the end, and then dip that cutting into potting mix. And the plant will create roots that way as well. Now, I've never tried it that way. I've always used water because it's so easy and it works for me. But if you want to just skip the step about the water and try placing the cuttings directly in potting mix, you can do that as well. So now I'm going to take you in for a closer look, and we're going to go ahead and just take some cuttings. Here I have some rubbing alcohol, and I'm just going to pour a small amount of the rubbing alcohol onto the cotton ball. I'm going to go ahead and sterilize my micro snips. Now you can see how tall this basil plant has become. So it will benefit from being cut. And you can see at one point, I did make a cut right down there. And what happens when you do that is it creates branching on both ends from where you make the cut. And that's a good thing. That makes for a bushier plant. When it comes to where to cut, some places say to cut right below a leaf node. So right below a leaf node would be like right here or right here. And on this particular plant, if I were to cut below this leaf node here, I wouldn't have a very big cutting. It would be fine. It would probably still root. I would just have to find a small enough jar. But I would prefer to take my cutting down here. However, I'm not going to cut below the leaf node. I'm going to cut above it. My experience has been it will still root just fine. And the reason I want to cut above it is I want this plant to then branch out right here on both sides where I'm going to take my cutting. And now this plant is much smaller, which is actually good. It's a little more manageable. And what I wanted to do is start putting more growth in this area down here, as well as on both sides here and both sides here. So for cutting size, you want it to be about 3 to 4 inches. It can be a little taller, a little shorter. And the key is you want to make sure that you have at least one leaf node that's below the water level. Optimally, you would have 2 leaf nodes, but I've tried it with just 1 leaf node and it's worked just fine. And the next thing you want to do is strip off any of the lower leaves. Now, don't let those leaves go to waste. Collect them and save them and enjoy them however you like to enjoy your basil leaves. And the key is you want to make sure that you leave at least one set of leaves on the top. And this would be considered one set of leaves. This would be considered 2 sets of leaves. You don't want any very large leaves either. You don't want the plant putting all its energy into this leaf growth. So I'm going to remove these 2 larger leaves. And just make sure that you don't have any material that's below the water that would cause rot. So no small leaves under the water. And at this point, one thing that you could also do is you could cut these leaves right here in half, just to make sure that the plant is putting enough energy into creating those roots and not trying to take care of these larger leaves. And that's it. We have a nice small cutting. And at this point, this can get placed into the water. Let's do this other one. And again, I have at least one leaf node that will be under the water. So that's the minimum that you want to have. Optimally, you would have 2 leaf nodes under the water. But again, it should still work fine. And notice how when I'm placing the cuttings in the water, I'm making sure that they're laying on the top of the jar here. I want to make sure that the green part, the leaves, do not go or touch the water. That's very important. One thing that I forgot to mention is where those leaf nodes are that I showed you, that's where you're going to see some roots forming. But you may also notice roots forming down at the base as well where we made the cut. What I plan on doing over the next few days is continue taking cuttings off of the rest of my basil plants because I want to have plenty of basil plants for myself as well as for my backyard plant nursery. The key is I have to change the water every 1 to 2 days. I don't want the plants to rot in the water. And also, I'm going to be placing these jars in an area where they don't get direct sunlight. So I wanted to show you, I did the same process a few weeks ago and I had great success, and I wanted to show you what happens after the roots form and what do the roots even look like. And you'll notice that there are roots that were forming down at the base, and I didn't even have a leaf node down there. And then some roots were forming at the leaf node right over here. And some roots are forming even along the stem down here. So the roots will form wherever they feel like forming. So what you want to do with this cutting is you want to take this cutting and place it in some sort of pre-moistened potting mix and let it grow on a little bit more just to get a little bit stronger. But remember, it's been living in water for a few weeks. So you want to make sure that the potting mix that you're using is very wet, nice and pre-moistened. This is just a small 3-inch round pot, and I filled it with pre-moistened potting mix. I'm using a pen to make a hole. I'm going to take my cutting and place it in there. And I'm just going to push down. You want to make sure you get those roots under the potting mix. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to cut off some of the leaves on the sides there, just because I don't feel that the plant needs all of these leaves on them right now. And you can see that it's trying to push new growth on both sides here. So maybe after a week or so, if I want, I can cut this top part off and let it keep branching out over here. But otherwise, here's a nice little plant start. I'm going to baby it for a few weeks under my LED shop lights and make sure I'm giving it plenty of water. All done. We have 2 little basil starts that are ready to take off and get bigger. Now for the basil plants that we just potted up, the most important thing is to keep those plants well watered for the next week. I don't want those to dry out at all. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I plan on making a lot more videos showing you how you can save money in your garden. Gardening can get expensive, but it doesn't have to be expensive. There are a lot of ways to save money in the garden, and propagating your own basil plants is one easy way to save money. Until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.